Max, we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Osterhout, executive producer at Lincoln Square.
And I'm Max Burns, contributor here at Lincoln Square.
And it is the end of the week. It is that time again, everyone. And it has been, well, it's been a week, I guess. Max, how you doing?
This one has flown by. I mean, I'm just counting the days I don't have the hantavirus. That seems like a great blessing. Though it does seem fitting almost that a potential pandemic would hit in both Donald Trump terms. It really cannot plan this stuff.
No, I will. Well, no, Trump cannot plan anything. But I'll admit it that on election day, my first thought was, Jesus Christ, we're gonna have another fucking pandemic. Like that was the first thing I thought. Obviously, I felt the trauma, the same thing from 2016 and all of those feelings. But then I was like, oh God, I can't buy more bidets. I've had enough. There can't be any more toilet paper shortages. This is what's going to happen. And it's kind of happening. By the way, this week, I felt like it was such a long week.
Yeah.
On Tuesday, it felt like Friday. And then on on Wednesday, it felt like Friday. But it wasn't Friday. That's such an unsatisfying feeling when you feel like it's Friday, but you have more days of the week left.
Yeah, I just stopped going into work on Tuesday anyway, so it was sort of Friday for me. I'm at the point in the American collapse cycle where I'm just not going to go in anymore. I'm done. I'm just going to read the news and then go to bed around 4 o'clock in the afternoon and wake up and just do nothing.
I think that sounds right. Especially after the week we've had. Everyone watching right now, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. If you're on YouTube or Facebook or X or on Substack, leave your questions in the chat or your comments. We'll run them as we can. Let's start. We have 5 stories today that I think are kind of important. And one at the very end that is a surprise story that only one person I know of is covering, and I'm looking at him right now. So we'll get to that one. Also, I think it's maybe the most important story of the week. I'm not trying to blow smoke, Matt,
I still cannot believe it's real. I'm both excited to share it, so at least some people know it happened, and also depressed that it happened at all.
Yeah, and that it's continuing to happen. Anyway,
yeah,
that's quite a teaser. We'll get to that later in the show. But first, on Wednesday, President Trump landed in Beijing for a 3-day state visit, his first trip to China in nearly 9 years. And of course, it was postponed from April because of the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, which has ended. Guys, it's over. The war is over and also continues. He arrived with a billionaire delegation, Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, Larry Fink, and others. CNN reports the trip is being framed around trade, tech, and Taiwan. But of course, Iran has been looming over every conversation because China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil, and the Strait of Hormuz is still under U.S. blockade and essentially Iranian control. CNBC's reporting from Beijing notes that Xi opened the meeting by warning Trump that mishandling Taiwan could put the U.S.-China relationship in great jeopardy. Max, Trump came home with a Boeing announcement and a soybean handshake. What actually got accomplished here, and what is happening?
And this is, remember, the same soybean handshake he said he had 6 months ago before China stopped buying soybeans completely. Trump went to China with no cards in his hand. I think it was pretty apparent to everybody. It was certainly apparent to Trump, who, if you watched him at the public events, was trying very hard not to say anything that might upset the Chinese. He was shockingly conciliatory, was trying to emphasize his shared respect for Xi Jinping, his shared respect for China and the government. None of the tough talk you hear Donald Trump saying when he's here in the United States. And that's because we went into this really as an underdog. I mean, the one thing Donald Trump could have done to show strength was sign an arms deal with Taiwan that he has very pointedly refused to sign before this trip for fear that it might scuttle the whole thing. And now we see him coming back with effectively nothing, giving China once again a huge public relations victory, and really no change in the status quo here for Americans who are struggling from high prices, reduced export markets. This really was a vacation for him and little else.
Yeah, well, and look, I mean, a lot of these meetings, these summits, these things are for photographers and headlines and press and media, and you don't. I think we've all come to not expect anything from Trump except a kind of a show. But I think there's a bigger sort of story emerging from all of this, and that is that China is becoming the stable power on the world stage, right? And I think conversely, the United States is becoming very quickly the absolute unstable power.
Yeah.
And I think that power is diminishing rapidly. Look, it's funny because in the beginning I thought, well, Trump could have the weird effect of making authoritarianism unpopular again because he's such a buffoon and he's fucking it up so bad. And the United States, with the tariffs and with the wars and with all of the things, it makes, maybe autocracy is a bad thing. However, in a perverse turn, it almost feels like she is coming out as the autocrat everyone wants.
Yeah, it's more than a feeling. I mean, if you look at what Xi Jinping has said at this summit and in the run-up to it, he is very openly positioning China as an alternative to democracy. He's been very clear that he thinks democracy in the modern era doesn't work, that it requires consensus you can't get. And he says, just look at America. You don't need me to sell you on this. Look at your own trade deals with the United States. Look how the United States is treating you. Look how they're treating their own citizens. And this is, as shocking and clearly propagandistic as it may seem to us in America, this is an argument that has a lot of appeal to countries in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, who are choosing right now between moving towards more liberal democratic systems and towards an authoritarian system like China. And what Xi Jinping is saying is, if you want stable economic growth, if you want public order, if you want trade deals that don't come conditioned with human rights and that you can actually trust, come to China, adopt our way, and we will welcome you into this club. And unlike the United States, we're growing. And that is a short-term argument, but these are leaders who at the moment are navigating huge international economic waves caused by the United States, and they're looking for any port in a storm. China has made it clear that they are willing to be that port, and it's pulling a lot of American allies away from our sphere of influence.
Yeah, and look, I think that we were all blinded to some degree that about our appeal to the rest of the world. We thought maybe it was culture, or maybe it was finance, money, power. Some hawks believe that everyone is in awe of our military and they love it so much that that's why we're welcome in their lands. And perhaps to some degree that's true. However, it was really, under all of that, it was stability, right? It was our ability to keep a very stable world afloat and continue it, continuing stability. And that stability encouraged markets and the free flow of capital and the free flow of people and stability, all of the things you need to build this world. And the first thing Trump did when he came in was turned over that stability. He said, "Oh, I wonder if my emoji will happen." Anyway.
Yeah.
It will.
And I get that it's knee-jerk to say, why would anyone choose China? They're authoritarians. People can see what they do. And my answer to that is always ask your kids, right? Because a majority of American kids now view China more aspirationally than the United States. And the reason they do is because they say that there's less social discord, that more things get done, that they care more about people than we do. All things that are not true, but that they are hearing through social media channels, through an aggressive propaganda campaign by China, and by looking at the country that we have right now and saying, this cannot be the promise of democracy, this mess we have, this is taking root in our own society. We are not immune to looking at other countries as better than us. And China's doing an amazing job right now of convincing a younger generation that maybe a little less democracy is a good price to pay for a little better future.
I mean, look, this is a very dangerous moment because, the longing for predictability and stability and all of those things is a very powerful human emotion, right? And there's nothing like chaos to push you into the arms of an autocrat. And look, ask the Uyghurs if it's working out, if China is working out. But I think about back in the Cold War days, the Eastern Bloc nations and the story of the Yugo car. There was a car lot with 1,500 cars on it, and they all operated with a single key. The story of the American triumph in the Cold War was the story of democracy, and again, stability and competition and excellence, right? Who has the better car right now? China.
Yeah.
It is the BYD and their electric cars. Oh, there's my emoji. You see that? God damn it. That keeps happening. And that's the story, right? China is full of these technological wonders. They are building factories at an incredible rate, and they're the highest tech, and they're the this and they're the that. That's a sparkle, right? That's a shine that people are going to be attracted to, especially when you got this dump of a country over here and the arc reactor hey, arc reactor, I see you in the chat. I love all your comments. I wonder if giving people a reason to leave or not come to the dysfunctional states of Trumplandia will cause the economy to contract. No, it couldn't be, but I think that's an amazing point, right?
And the thing that stings the most is this is our playbook being used against us. When Richard Nixon brought the Russians over and walked them through a grocery store to show them the abundance of American society, that was a pivotal moment in Russian consciousness, right? And what China's been doing through social media and now through this state visit is doing the same thing, is showing an entire generation of impressionable Americans, these abundant shelves, these great cars, all this solar, all these jobs. It's not true, but it's true enough that they're willing to believe it. And that is a huge soft power win for China that we have not even begun to counter.
Yes. And actually, SMR, that's nice. I like that. Threatening the sovereignty, waging economic warfare, and demeaning those who died for the U.S. have played a major role in moving away from America. And that is a great transition, actually, to our second story of the week. Late Thursday night, ABC, that was last night, news broke that President Trump is poised to drop his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS. A suit he filed against his own administration over the 2019 leak of his tax returns, which someone actually has already gone to jail for, in exchange for the creation of a $1.7 billion taxpayer-funded compensation fund. So according to ABC's reporting, the fund would pay out claims to anyone alleging they were harmed by what the administration calls Biden-era weaponization. And that includes, you guessed it, nearly 1,600 January 6 defendants. So the money comes out of the Treasury's judgment fund. I think we all need our own judgment fund, personally, Max. Trump himself would have the power to remove commission members without cause, and the commission would have no obligation to disclose how it makes decisions. Sounds super on the level. Raskin has called it a $1.7 billion fraud on the American taxpayer. So where is this money going? What's happening?
Well, boy, it's amazing the things you can do when you file the lawsuits and you get to decide who wins. I mean, this is a handout to the January 6th domestic terrorists. This is saying, apply, we'll give you some money. We're not going to tell anyone you applied. We're not going to tell them how much we gave you. This is a thank you for your vote. I mean, this is essentially buying loyalty of people who he's pardoned, people who attacked the United States government, people who attacked police. But please tell me again how Democrats hate cops. But now the United States government has not only apologized to people who beat police, but now we're going to give them some cash just because they supported Donald Trump. Give me a break. Like, this is the kind of kleptocracy, the kind of open air corruption that makes people wonder if democracy works.
Well, I think that's right. And I think, look, maybe we should go on, one of those prediction markets and put a wager on how much of this makes it to small defendants or small claimants, and how much of it makes it into the pockets of Trump himself. I mean, it does feel like a grab. And I think it's also just kind of worth saying again, and sort of going over this again, how this all came about. The judge in this situation said, wait a second, you represent the plaintiff and the defendant. You're the same person. So we need to bring in somebody else to even see if you have standing, right, to file this claim. And the deadline was the 20th, May 20th, in a couple of days. And they saw the deadline coming and they were like, fuck, we need to settle. Like, we're not going to get anything out of it because it's ridiculous. This is the dumbest thing. Like, Biden weaponization. I'm like, Trump is entitled to compensation for any of this. It's bullshit. And so they settled, and that's what this settlement is all about. I don't know how they came to 1.7 billion.
Well, this just gets at what we've been talking about too, right? Which is that Donald Trump, through this term, has been building a parallel legal system that's accountable only to him. You don't have to go through the courts now to adjudicate your claim that the Biden administration unjustly convicted you. You can now go to a Trump court, which will conduct your hearing in secret, is already told you it's going to side with you, and then it's going to give you taxpayer money. And what this is going to result in is directly funding terrorist groups like the Proud Boys. Right? Your taxpayer dollars will now go to fund people who are planning attacks on the United States government. And the only reason this is the case is because they're planning attacks that Donald Trump approved of.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And look, it's also worth noting that Ashley Babbitt her family has been compensated. She breached the Capitol. Who haven't been? Any of the law enforcement officers who were beaten that day, almost within an inch of their lives, right? This is a priority. And this is what Trump is building. This comes to it's a real good segue to the next story, the third story of the week. We have China, number one. Trump taking us all paying Trump $1.7 for something. And then on Wednesday, VP, our favorite, JD Vance, flanked by Dr. Mehmet Oz, announced the Trump administration is deferring $1.3 billion in federal Medicaid payments to California, citing alleged fraud in the state's home health program. So Cal Matters reports that Oz called it the largest deferral we've ever made. The state denies the allegations and says CMS has produced no supporting evidence. The action comes as Vance leads a White House anti-fraud task force that so far has targeted, spoiler, Democratic-led states only. Minnesota, California, New York, Hawaii, all of them are under threat. Gavin Newsom has struck back, and there are a lot of claims that there's no fraud, but also there's no claim that simply deferring this funding will end the fraud. So is this fraud enforcement, or is this a punitive freeze on a blue state?
Well, here's the thing, right? This is what JD Vance wants us to do, and wants the mainstream media to do, that they have done, is to sit here and say, there's no fraud in California. We know that. The data shows there's no fraud. This is just attacking the left. But here's what's actually happening. Cut through the messaging JD Vance wants you to think about and recognize that the United States government is no longer meeting its Medicare, Medicaid obligations to states. Now, it's an open question whether they can, even if this wasn't a case. Donald Trump has said already that because of the war in Iran, we may have to get used to not having as much Medicare and Medicaid, that we can't afford to fund both. So if I'm the White House and I suddenly can't afford to pay California's Medicare, Medicaid subsidies, am I going to say, sorry, we're broke, we ran the government out of money? Or am I going to pretend it's about fraud? The question is, when do we start seeing this creep into other states? And how long can the federal government continue to hide that it may not be able to pay the Medicare and Medicaid that states deserve and Americans are owed?
So, just talking about his settlement, the 1.7 billion, it's so closely tied, not tied, but like 1.3 billion that we're not giving to the citizens of California. 1.7 billion that the citizens of America are funneling directly to Trump, right? Like, how can Democrats tie this together?
Well, you look at this, all is graft at the highest level. You now have the Congress talking about $1 billion for funding Donald Trump's for funding Donald Trump's ballroom, which he said would be privately funded. You've got the Pentagon now saying there's $30 billion more needed for Iran. These are the people who said we didn't have enough money to extend the Affordable Care Act for people in red states. And now we suddenly don't have the money to pay people's Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, how much are we going to ask people to do without so that Donald Trump can keep raking in money for himself and his family? That's the question Democrats need to be asking.
Yeah, and he comes back and he's like, China has a ballroom. Like, it is literally all he can think about. It is like the little worm in RFK Jr.'s brain. It's like ballroom, 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 ballroom. And it is literally the worst message he could have in a time when gas is in some places going up to $6 a gallon.
Yeah.
When, like, my little hybrid car is costing $55 to fill. Like, it is wild. And that is what he's focusing on. And it makes me, back to the settlement, the weaponization settlement. And it's why I asked, what are the odds that this money actually gets to anyone other than Trump? Because clearly it's a bad look, right? Having us pay Trump a settlement for something that we don't totally understand, and that probably isn't on the level. And so, of course, he says, no, it's going to go to people who are victims. Right?
And the bigger problem is
one victim he's really interested in.
The bigger problem is, how do you stop any of it, right? The Supreme Court has said Donald Trump effectively has unlimited immunity in creating executive agencies and in acting as president in an official capacity. So he's created this separate court that's going to give away $1.7 billion to who knows who. Doesn't have to tell you, the people whose money it is. So you take it to court and it's thrown out because it's under official acts. So how do you actually stop any of this? How do you promote any transparency? Not that Republicans care, but I think at some point, when Democrats and Republicans and people across the country have gone without their Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid for a couple months, when the price of hamburger is $7 a pound like it is now, the highest in history, they're going to start to wonder why we don't know where any of this money's going.
Well, and look, it's so funny. We talk about kitchen table issues, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this before, how generally voters are like, yeah, international politics and policy are interesting, but they're not really what take me to the polls. Trump has single-handedly connected, international policy to the kitchen table. Because if you can't afford medication, if you can't afford your doctor's bills, if you're going bankrupt because of, you got pneumonia, and you also can't afford to have a fucking hamburger, where the money is. It is tied up in a ballroom and is tied up in the Strait of Hormuz, right? Those now become kitchen table issues. And so does, by the way, corruption. Because if the money, and look at what happened to Orban. It came down to corruption. Like, be corrupt if you want, but I need a hamburger, right? I have to have hamburger. And he's really, it is like, this is a game of election for the Democrats to lose.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The man has stolen so much from us, from you, that most Americans are struggling to afford a hamburger in the United States of America. Do you know how much money you have to steal to make it hard to afford a hamburger in America? It's staggering. And when you start picking people's pockets that blatantly, they're going to respond.
Yeah. So everyone out there, if you're just joining, I'm Sam Osterhout with Max Burns. It's the end of the week. We're going through the stories of the week. We may only have time for 4, and we'll get to the 5th if we have space, but we got to get to this one. So in a barely publicized vote Tuesday evening, the House passed H.R. 2853, or the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, also called CORCA. Wonderful. It passed 348 to 60. Max Burns at the Daily Cost reports that's you, Max.
That is me.
144 Democrats joined, 203 Republicans to send it to the Senate. So, one, take us through this story. What is it? And why? Second question on my follow-up. Why the fuck are you the only one reporting on this thing?
There is an entire media blackout, and it's not for want of trying. I pitched over a dozen outlets on this story over the past few weeks, some directly telling me it just wasn't news. And on its face, I get it. Who could care about a bill that makes it tougher to shoplift, right? Everybody should support this. But in reality, if you look at this bill, what it is a gigantic handout to the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. What it does is allow the Department of Homeland Security to create a new national crime center for organized shoplifting, a crime they get to define, with a director appointed by the director of ICE. And what it allows them to do is work with local and state law enforcement and private companies to collect information about people who are accused of shoplifting, including personal information, citizenship status, driver's license information, health information. There is no practical limit in the bill to what they can collect. They can then take that information, share it across the government however they want, with no restrictions. And though companies aren't forced to do this, if they don't, the Department of Homeland Security can do what they call reprioritizing federal grants to local law enforcement. So basically, you help give all of the personal information of people who are just accused of shoplifting to ICE, or you can kiss goodbye all of your federal police training money, all of your vehicle maintenance grants, and we have no idea where any of this data is being stored, how it's being stored, how it's being used, and you have no right to ask under the language of this bill.
So, I mean, all of that is terrifying. There is some reporting, and I believe it's your reporting, that found they are working towards this sort of centralized database or centralized sort of mechanism for storing all of this data. But I think the thing that I want to kind of circle back on is that this isn't people who are charged and convicted of shoplifting.
Yeah.
Right. This is
anyone who is stopped at the discretion of a company, and they can collect information in collaboration with the police. They can set up geo-gating at their facilities, which will scrape information off of your phone, even if you have not been stopped for a crime. And the reason they're doing this is because private companies are not subject to the same Fourth Amendment search and seizure protections that governments are when they come to you. A company can take a lot more of your information without triggering a Fourth Amendment challenge than the government can. So by having companies do this, the government gets a nice trove of information and they don't have to go to court about it.
And what are they going to do with this information?
Literally nobody knows. It's not included in the bill. There is no safeguard to how it's used, how it's stored, who gets to use it, only that the director of the center, who's appointed by ICE, can decide as is needed in the language of the bill what it's used for and when that information should be shared with other people. Even if it is legally confidential or privileged personal information, if they decide they need it for something, they can send it over to ICE and have them come pick you up.
I mean, look, if MAGA is so, and the world is so in awe of China, welcome. Right,
Yeah.
right. This is
And 84 Democrats in the House co-sponsored this bill.
so. That's my second question: is why? What's and your own reporting flipped some of them. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, we saw dozens drop. Or Ro Khanna, who was a major co-sponsor, didn't vote at all. And the part of it is they didn't read it. They took it at face value. The other part is that retail trade organizations give a lot of money. And places like Palantir and AI firms that are going to be building these databases have given a lot of money to the Democrats sponsoring this bill. In the Senate, you have Jackie Rosen, Mark Kelly, a couple other Democrats as well they're co-sponsoring, who have taken pretty significant money from these lobbying industry groups. They have an incentive not to read too deeply into what it does, but it's certainly betraying their pledge to fight ICE.
Yeah, the arc reactor in a very near future, and perhaps now, all suspects are guilty, period. Otherwise, they wouldn't be suspect, would they? I mean, this is where we are. And look, I think this also gets at the sort of electoral temperature where we are at the moment, because what is this for, right? Go back to the kitchen table that we were just talking about. Does this help you buy a hamburger? Does it? And the only good thing about this in their eyes, I'm sure, is that nobody knew about it until you.
Yeah. I mean, and the reality is, sure, retail shoplifting is bad. No one likes to go to CVS and see the chocolate behind a locked box, but it's also a local law enforcement issue. No one who I spoke to about this, the few who would speak to me, could explain to me the federal national security issue involved in someone shoplifting Tide Pods that would necessitate having ICE involved at the federal level in investigating them. No one, because it doesn't exist. This is an opportunity to collect more data and to do it around the Constitution.
Look, shoplifting being a local issue as well. When shoplifting really increases is when you fuck the economy, right? When the only way to get that cheeseburger is to steal it.
Yeah. It certainly is not coincidental. I think that this is, finding a great way to collect data from people who are now going to be driven to having to shoplift to get by in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah. What are we going to do? Deport everyone who's hungry? Then there's no more hunger.
Yeah. I genuinely believe a large part of this is targeting lower income Americans, many of whom are non-citizens or who are naturalized citizens. We've seen it doesn't matter the difference anymore, and bringing them into this database.
Where does this go? So it's in the Senate this week?
So now it goes to the Senate. There's not a date set for the vote yet, but I encourage people to call your senator and look up the roll call vote in the House. I've posted it on my Twitter at the Max Burns, along with all of the sections outlining what happens. Don't take my word for it. Read it yourself and then get mad. Call your lawmakers and ask why any Democrat who says they stand against ICE would be within a mile of this monstrosity.
And that's the thing. Look, this isn't just a Republican bill, right? This had Democratic co-sponsors. Like you said, some of them didn't show up to vote after they were, poked and prodded about that. So I'm going to put that up again.
Both Nevada Democratic senators, Amy Klobuchar, shockingly, a huge voice against ICE, is a co-sponsor on this. I'd love to hear what she has to say about it.
Call him. Everyone call. Call your senator, call your reps, call everyone, Democrat or Republican. One part of the article that was so fascinating is a huge pressure campaign came from TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah, the only people, mainstream media didn't cover this. You look it up, you will not find a story about this anywhere. It was young progressive activists on TikTok, people with 1 million and 2 million followers. Young people who took the time to read the bill themselves and share it among themselves. The only reason most people know about this.
Pressure works, people. Pressure works. Well, Max, we did have one other story, but I think we're going to have to miss it. But I'll post it in the write-up after this. It's about a couple of
don't call Tom Keene or Frederica Wilson. They're missing from Congress. No one will pick up your call.
Where are they? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
They've been gone for a very long time as well. I'll write about that in the write-up for this. Max, thanks for joining. Everyone out there, thank you for your questions, your comments. This is always a blast. I hope you have a great week, great weekend. I hope you touch some grass. Max, what are you going to do this weekend?
I am going to be thinking about CORCA. I'm going to be doing more reporting on this. It's not going away. I'm obsessed with it. Not going to let it go. And neither should anybody else.
Where can we?
But also get out there, get some ice cream. Don't get hantavirus.
Yeah, that's a great way to end. Everyone, thanks. See you next time.
Bye.